It is wonderful to be here in the incredible riding of MP Jean Yip in Scarborough Asian Court. And of course, I'm joined on the stage with both of my Member of Parliament colleagues in MP Majid Jahari and MP Paul Chang. And it really is terrific to be here and to see so many wonderful members of the community, colleagues from the different orders of government. And of course, it's great to see both senators. I always call him Pao, so when I have to say the whole thing, it's Senator Yun Pao Wu, and of course Senator Victor O. It's wonderful to be here with you, colleagues. And I want to thank the members of the Commission marking the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Exclusion Act and for inviting us here to be at splendid Chinese Mall. I can think of so many wonderful, wonderful events that we have spent here celebrating over the years, right here with all of my colleagues that are on stage, but certainly I see Isa there. Now Isa is very special because she is my colleague who represents the same constituents as I do, just on the other side of steel. So, so it's wonderful to be here, but of course with all of our colleagues from both the provincial and the municipal orders of government. But we are here today as part of Asian Heritage Month to celebrate the histories, the traditions, and the cultures of Asian Canadians. And there's a lot to celebrate. I was just in Vancouver a few days ago doing something very, very similar as part of Asian Heritage Month in May, where we spend the entire month largely celebrating and featuring the incredible accomplishments of Asian Canadians, Chinese Canadians across the country. But we also need to take time to reflect on our past. And this year marks the 100th anniversary of the Exclusion Act. It is the reason that we are gathered here today to mark this significant milestone in this history for Chinese Canadians and Asian Canadians. And it wasn't a particularly good history. 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, Chinese Canadians crossed over the Pacific during the Fraser gold rush in British Columbia, and they started there. The first Chinatown was in Victoria, followed very shortly by Vancouver, which, Pao just had a lovely smile because that's where Pao is from. And they made their way across the country into places like Edmonton, Calgary, and then Winnipeg, and into Ontario, further into Montreal, into Charlottetown, all the way across our country. But in those early starts, Chinese laborers came to our country searching for better economic opportunities for themselves and for their families at home. And they were so instrumental in building what is a connector across our country, which is the railway. But during that time, those Chinese immigrants faced discriminatory and exclusionary laws. And in 1885, the Canadian government imposed a head tax on Chinese immigrants. And that head tax amount increased over time. I remember stories, and I remember so many stories told by so many here. I mean, Jean, for so many of those in your riding here in Scarborough Agent Court, as well as in both Richmond Hill, but also in Markham Unionville, the Chinese immigrants who were here were able to tell those stories of the time where they had to pay the head tax, where they had to maiji to come to Canada. That was a very, very difficult and dark time. And then in 1923, 100 years ago, the Chinese Immigration Act, also known as the Chinese Exclusion Act, was passed. Chinese Canadians faced immense discrimination and racism during this period. The Exclusion Act not only prevented new Chinese immigrants from coming to Canada, but it reinforced the negative stereotypes and prejudices against Chinese Canadians. Now, Chinese Canadians didn't accept this discriminatory treatment silently. They organized and they launched significant advocacy campaigns to repeal this act. They worked with sympathetic politicians of the time. They worked with labor unions. They worked with community leaders. And finally, in 1947, think about it, from 1923, it took until 1947 to repeal the Chinese Exclusion Act. And when that was done, it was a significant victory for Chinese Canadians across this country. The repeal finally allowed for the reunification of Chinese families, and it paved the way for greater Chinese immigration to Canada. Waves after waves since that time. Families included my own, and I would say included ours here on the stage, but also, I would dare say, all of yours who are sitting in the audience today. Today, we are proud Asian Canadians. We are proud Chinese Canadians. We contribute to every aspect of Canadian life, from business to arts and culture, to sports and science, to teachers, to frontline healthcare workers, to farmers, to professionals, and of course, to political life. I'm happy to say that now we have 8 members of Parliament in Canada across all parties that represent ridings in different parts of the country who serve Canadians who have Chinese descent. And look at the room of the representatives here from the other orders of government who also are elected officials of Asian and Chinese descent. We have 2 senators who are here of Asian descent. So all of us together make an incredible, strong voice. I'm very privileged to serve in Prime Minister Trudeau's cabinet and together with my members of Parliament colleagues. Our government is committed to keeping these stories alive, and I know that there are many in this room who are going to use this year to mark this important time in history, to reflect on it, to make sure that it never happens again. I was just in Vancouver, like I said, a few days ago. I announced the federal government funding $5 million for the first ever Chinese Canadian Museum. There's never been a museum like this in Canada, and I got to take a sneak preview. It is going to open on July the 1st. And everyone, I would encourage you to get there, and when you invite people to come to Canada, they should visit there to see the artifacts, the stories, the archives, the works of art, the photography, and everything that brings to life of the time and the journey of Chinese immigrants to Canada. And the first exhibit, which is the paper trail. It's the paper trail all the way to the Chinese Exclusion Act. I was told that the paper trail and that Chinese immigrants are the most documented people. The reason they have so much paper is because everywhere you moved in this country, you were documented in one way or another in those early times. It was a difficult time. And when you walk through there and you see, it is like you are walking through the past. So it's quite impactful. So we're very happy that the federal government was able to contribute $5 million together with, of course, the provincial government. And I was there with Ken Sims, who's the mayor of Vancouver, a Chinese mayor in Vancouver. And in just a month, like I said, in just a month, it's going to open. And we will be able to reflect and to celebrate. In addition to that investment, we are investing $1.8 million to revitalize Chinatown and the areas around Chinatown in Vancouver. We are also investing to revitalize and support the Winnipeg Chinese Cultural Center. And because we're so committed to this work as the federal government of Canada, I think that this year's theme of Asian Heritage Month of Stories of Determination really rings true. Because when we think about the history of Chinese Canadians, we think about our own histories and how we contribute. And while we recognize the incredible contributions that Asian Canadians have made, we're reminded that there's a lot of important work that still has to be done. All of us have seen the rise of anti-Asian racism. I know that I and every single one of my colleagues, including the Prime Minister, have stood up firm and strong to stand up against hate, because there is no room for hate and there's no room for anti-Asian racism in this country. And in response to this, our government took a whole of government approach. We provided $11 million of funding specifically to fight anti-Asian racism, and we've created the National Anti-Racism Strategy. Racism and intolerance goes directly against who we are as Canadians. Look at this beautiful riding. Look at the Greater Toronto Area. Diversity is such a fact, including all of us in our wonderful democracy and our country and our neighborhoods and our communities, is a choice, and a choice that we all make. It's a choice we make with our allies. Let's keep doing this work. I think this year's theme of Stories of Determination, it might be this year's theme, but I think this theme of determination is going to last a lifetime. And here at this event today, let's recognize and celebrate what is today and what is for sure the future. But let's not forget the past. And for this, I've been saying this for years now, and certainly most actively in the last number of months, along with all of my colleagues. It was the advocacy that repealed that terrible piece of legislation, working with sympathetic politicians and with community leaders and with people, with Canadians. Advocacy works. Your voices standing up as Chinese Canadians and Asian Canadians work. So keep that advocacy alive, because you can help shape public opinion for the better, for the positive. You can challenge discriminatory policies, and you can stand up against anti-Asian hate, and you can advocate for creating more equality and more social justice in Canada. We have done it generation after generation after generation, and I see the young people in this room today, and guess what? We're gonna do it for you too, but let's do it together. Let's keep raising our voices, get involved, get a seat at that table, like so many of you who have been elected and have that seat and that voice at the table. And let's stand proudly together as Asian Canadians, but as Canadians. And let's keep contributing to this wonderful country that we all call Canada. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.